Welcome to Kid Missing TV Episode 3. This episode is entitled Maine's Missing. I would like to dedicate this episode to my number one supporter in the grand old state of Maine, my great aunt Maude Lee. My mom is from the state of Maine. I know many of these places that we'll be discussing pretty well. The first case that I would like to focus on is that of 3-year-old Kurt Ronald Newton. Kurt disappeared from Chain of Ponds, Maine, when he and his family were staying in a in a campground. He attempted to follow his dad and another gentleman when they were taking a walk, I guess, and he was on his big wheels. He vanished, and his big wheels were found at the dump, the campground. They used mind-boggling technology, considering it was the state of Maine. Search planes, a $10 million C-130H Air Force gunship used in Vietnam to find guerrillas in dense jungle. They used its infrared to help find him. A Maine Warden Service helicopter. The Maine Warden Service also did a grid search with maps and compasses, just like they still do. For 13 days. And it rained, and the terrain was full of thick brush and moss-covered holes. It was very dangerous. His parents, Ron and Jill Newton, were there every day calling for their son. How sad is that? Retired forest ranger Tom Lamont was there and remembers hearing Jill Newton call from a helicopter. He says they were very tough people. He said he cried as much as the mother did when she was in the helicopter, just begging him to wave. He said that there's no one that's tough enough not to cry in that situation. He said, if you have a heart, seeing a mother like that, you will cry. He said he even has a hard time talking about it to this day. A few days later, retired state police captain Ray Leemoulton, then a patrol supervisor in Skowhegan, is the one that actually called in the Air Force plane that we were discussing earlier. All they found were animals. I would imagine that a deer, or especially a moose, gives off a much larger heat signature than does a small boy. After 13 days, the search was scaled back. But the search wasn't over. In the weeks and months after the initial search, Kurt's parents sent posters with pictures to every school district in the country to see if he'd been enrolled. Leemoulton said detectives worked constantly following leads. Many more times he searched because he lived right there. The tips slowed to a trickle after time. They got a tip in the mid-'80s, and they thought it was their big break. Police found out from out of state, sent a picture of a boy that they thought looked like Kurt. And the detective was so convinced that it was him that he was making flight arrangements, and when Jill Newton looked at the picture, she said it wasn't her son. The next case that I'd like to talk to you about is that of Roger Merton Day. Roger disappeared, it is believed, on his way from his home in Porter, Maine to the Fryeburg Fair. Fryeburg is about 21 and a half miles from Porter, and it takes about 32 minutes to get there, according to my research. He was 14 years old, and it was not uncommon in 1973 when he disappeared October 4th, to hitchhike. And I'm kind of wondering if that's what he did. And it certainly would explain Roger did have one characteristic that is important to mention. His middle finger, I'm not sure on which hand, had been smashed flat in an accident. It had been crushed. So it's something to keep in mind when looking for him. My next case is that of Douglas Charles Chapman. Douglas was 3 years old. He disappeared from the town of Alfred, Maine on June 2nd, 1971 at about 10:30 in the morning. He was reported missing by his mom. His mom saw him playing by a sand pile about 25 yards from their residence. She went in the residence to take a phone call. And Dad was at work. And she went outside. He was gone. Police say there was no sign of a struggle found at the scene. His father was an auxiliary policeman, and the case was reopened in 1993 at his request. Douglas, at the time of his disappearance, police dogs had traced his scent through a yard, an orchard, and out to the main road. His was the largest search ever in York County. Over 2,000 folks searched, including a bunch of high school kids that joined the search. That's really all that's known, sadly, about Douglas. You'll see his pictures. The next case that I would like to talk to you about is that of Kathy Marie Moulton. Kathy disappeared from Portland. Portland's the largest city in the state of Maine. It is one of the southernmost cities. She was planning on going to a dance at the local YWCA that evening, and on September 24th, 1971. She had her dad drop her off as he was going into the office, even though it was a Saturday morning, down on Cumberland Avenue, and she walked over to Forest Avenue. And they know that she picked up pantyhose and toothpaste for that night, for the dance. She met a friend at a record store and told her friend she had to go home because she had to get ready for the dance, and she would see her there. She exited the record store and disappeared. Her parents reported her missing when she wasn't home for dinner. Her parents were literally laughed at when her father went to the police station because she was only an hour late. The desk sergeant literally laughed at him. You'll hear him talk about that in a clip, which I'll be playing you in a couple of minutes. But I just want to give you the rest of the story first. In November of that year, a witness claimed to have seen her at a gas station in Presque Isle. Here's what we know about that situation. There was a car stolen by two men, and it is believed they are the people who abducted Kathy. When that car and Kathy were taken to Presque Isle, the criminals, not being very bright, used the credit card belonging to the vehicle's owner to obtain tires for the vehicle. Many years later, the vehicle was actually located in a field on the property of one of the suspects who had succumbed to cancer. Why you keep the car, I can't imagine. Presque Isle is over an hour. Right here. Portland to Presque Isle. Is an 286 miles. It's about an hour and 26-minute drive from Portland, because Presque Isle is way up at the top of Maine. When you see the map that I'm going to show you, you'll see the distance. Kathy, as I mentioned, may have been seen in Presque Isle at a gas station, and then again picking potatoes, begging to go home. This fits with a sighting of human remains in 1983 in Smyrna, Maine, which is a neighboring town to Presque Isle. And the second man involved in her case is actually currently spending some time cooling his heels in a Canadian jail for murder. And he refuses to talk about Kathy. Her parents are now 88 years old. I had the privilege of talking to her father, and he talks about, in this clip, the very last time he saw his daughter and their very last interaction with each other.
It was noontime, and we had dinner at home, noontime dinner at home, which we always did, and Kathy was there, and she was going in town, Portland, to buy some pantyhose or something like that, and some couple of 3 things at the department store that her mother wanted. And it was a beautiful day. And so on my way back to the office, I said, I'll give you a ride in town. So I proceeded to do that down Forest Avenue, because we lived out off Forest Avenue, a little 2 or 3 miles out. And I gave her a ride, and she said, Dad, why don't you just let me off at the corner of Cumberland Avenue and Forest Avenue, because that was only 1 block from Congress Street, and she loved to walk. And so I said, sure. So, as was customary in our family, she leaned over and gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, I love you, Dad. And I said, I love you too, sweetheart.
That's kind of sad. He also talks a little bit about, in this next clip, he talks a little bit about the situation in Presque Isle, the trouble he ran into attempting to find his daughter up there. So please listen.
My grandfather was a policeman on the Portland Police Department before he died, but I never met him because he died when my father was young. He said, it's politics. I said, what do you mean it's politics? He said, Mr. Moulton, the sheriff's department, the police department, and the state police don't talk to each other. Now, I'll tell you, I was very shocked by this, especially being in the mood of having a missing daughter. And I couldn't believe what my ears were hearing.
The next case that I'd like to talk to you about is that of Bernard Bunny Ross, Jr. He disappeared in 1977 from Ashland Portage, Maine. They say he was despondent at the time of his disappearance. There's very little known in this case. He was actually a resident of Fort Kent, and he was initially considered a suspect in the theft of a vehicle from Presque Isle. The vehicle was found and the charges were dropped. He was not found and was reported missing by his family. He was last seen May 12th in a wooded area off Realty Road near the Ashland Portage town line. Numerous attempts to find him have turned up 0 clues. The next case is that of Kimberly Moro. Kimberly was 16 years old when she disappeared on May 11th, 1986, from the town of Jay, Maine. The town of Jay, Maine, about the only thing in the town of Jay, Maine, is a paper mill. So the town of Jay, Maine, not a nice fragrance. In fact, they lived on a street just behind the paper mill, according to her dad. She decided that she wasn't going to go to the junior prom because she'd had a fight with a boyfriend, and decided to go out with a friend instead. And she would be home by 11. She was last seen in a late model white Monte Carlo or Trans Am with her friend and a 25-year-old male. Apparently, her friend knew the man. Her sister is the one who saw her. She didn't bring her pocketbook, her makeup, any of her personal belongings with her when she left. Her friend stated that she and the male dropped her off at 3:45 a.m., that she requested to be let out of the car on Jewel Street, a half mile from her residence. It's like the end of her street. What I'd like to do right now, before I go into any more details, is have you listen to a clip of her dad talking about that day. This is Richard Moro talking about that day on Kid Missing Radio.
Well, the night that Kim disappeared, it was junior prom night, and it was the day before Mother's Day. Kim came home, and she told her sister that she was going to be gone for just a short while, and she left the house, and we've never seen her since.
I understand that she was seen, I don't know if it was by her sister, but she was seen getting into a white Trans Am?
Yeah, she left in a white car. I believe it was a Trans Am.
With her girlfriend and two boys?
No, with her girlfriend and one guy.
Foul play is suspected. The man that she was last seen with is the person of interest. No charges have been filed, and we do not use his name. I'd like to play you a clip now of her dad talking about, without names, the people who are believed to be involved in the case.
Yes. Have you yourself talked to her girlfriend that was with her that night? Maybe as a parent you can get through to her, because I'm sure she's a parent now herself.
She's the one that died.
Oh.
But yes, we did talk with her.
I also read about a suspect in the newspaper, and I know we don't want to go too much into it, but I did read that his initials were CT, as in C. Tidswell, and he was from Livermore Falls. Is that correct?
No, he's from Livermore.
Livermore, okay.
The next thing that I would like to do is give you a couple of phone numbers. Of course, you can always call 1-800-THE-LOST, and you can call them, for any of these cases, you can call the Maine State Police at 207-657-3030. 207-657-3030. What I'd like to do now is give my tips for this month. I have discussed something that I didn't know about. There are temporary tattoos that my producer told me about, where you can actually write the information about your child and your name and phone number right on it, stick it to your kid. It's great when you go to the amusement park, back when we went to places like Wellham Park. It would have been handy, because how many little kids, you say, what does mommy look like, and they say mommy, great, that helps. So, and something that one of my friends actually posted on Facebook as a sign, take a picture of your child when they leave your house, whether it's to go trick-or-treating or go out somewhere, so you know exactly what outfit they're wearing. Most cell phones have cameras today. Take a picture. And something very, very important that my mother and I have actually discussed is the fact that parents, and I've seen it, I've heard it, and it just makes me cringe. They threaten their little kids by saying, if you're not good, the police will come and take you away. Police are supposed to be their friends. You don't want to make children afraid of the police. You want them to be able to have the confidence to go to the police if they need them. And if you threaten them with them all the time, they're going to be afraid of them. They're going to think if they go asking for help, they're going to put them in jail or something. And you also need to let your kids know that some bad guys actually do dress up as policemen. But there are a couple of things you can look for. If you get a chance, get a good look at the badge if he shows it to you. But one big thing is policemen wear a radio right here on their shoulder. If he's not wearing a radio, he's not a real policeman. Make sure your kids are aware of what your local law enforcement agency's uniforms look like. Make sure they know who their local policemen are. I always knew who my local policemen were. I knew their faces even if I didn't know their names. The last thing that I'd like to do is dedicate this show in loving memory of Sharon Hemingway, my cousin in Denver, Colorado. Actually, my cousin's wife in Denver, Colorado, who this past week lost her battle with cancer. I'd like to do one other thing. If somebody of the two people behind the camera can get a quick picture of this. This is my grandpa, one of the most wonderful people in the world, God rest his soul, from the state of Maine. And he's one of the reasons that I love Maine so much. God bless you. Stay safe on this holiday weekend. And just remember, no matter how old they are, every missing kid is someone's kid missing. Good night.